May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your eyes, God. For you are our rock. You are our Redeemer. Amen. So there was one verse in the readings for today that I kept coming back to, and I didn't even necessarily mean to keep coming back to it, but it just stuck out in my mind. It's verse 19 in that Deuteronomy passage, and it is possibly because I grew up in a time when train spotting was really popular, and there was a giant poster that a lot of people had. It was just like a round of the opening monologue from Train Spotting. Has anyone else seen this poster? Does anyone else have this in their mind? Okay. Well, the big word at the end of it is choose life. And so I'll reread verse 19 of Deuteronomy. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. Choose life. For me, at least, these words seem really hard to enact these days. The great leader, Moses of the people, he is asking us to make a profound choice, to choose life. I keep coming back to it. Choose life. How can I choose life when the administration seems to be edging towards death? How can I choose life when my friends are scared for their lives, for their families? How can I choose life when the earth is on the breaking point of global warming? How can I choose life when refugees are fleeing certain death, cast off in overstuffed boats, with the chance of death on the water being better than its certainty at home? How can I choose life when the voice in my head says it might be easier not to? The passage from Deuteronomy comes as the last 5 verses of the farewell address by Moses to the people as they are poised to enter the Holy Land, a land that has been promised to them. And Moses is poised to enter the world beyond. He has been told by God he will not set foot in the promised land. The Israelites are about to embark out on uncharted territory, into a land promised to them, but unknown to them. And I think we too are in uncharted territory. We too stand on a verge. We too are instructed by Moses to choose life. In the text from Corinthians, the message is of another choice, of the choice to choose solidarity. Paul shames the Corinthians for acting like babies. It's one of those classic Paul things where he acts like he has never done something like this before. He says that the factionalization of the Corinthians along the lines of followers of Paul or of Apollos shows their immaturity. The question I had when I read this text is, who is this Apollos character? Is this the God? Who are we talking about here? And Apollos that we meet here is another evangelist. He's an Alexandrian Jew who has been taught the gospel. In another translation of the first letter to the Corinthians, it reads a little bit more clearly where this immaturity comes from. This is from the translation called The Message. When you are jealous of one another and divide up into quarreling groups, doesn't that prove you are still babies, wanting your own way? In fact, you are acting like people who don't belong to the Lord at all. There you are, quarreling about whether I am greater than Apollos and dividing the church. Doesn't this show you how little you have grown in the Lord? Paul says that until they begin to see himself and Apollos as just teachers, or as he puts it in the letter, planters and waterers, they will not comprehend that the one who actually, in fact, gives life is God, and that it is to God who they belong. The lectionary has put these two texts together for us today, and I think it's a real gift when we put these in conversation. Paul tells that the early Christians, he tells them something that we too need to be reminded of. That while we might have different ways of being, different allegiances, different spiritual leaders who really speak to us, or different traditions that we adhere to, that belonging to God is more important than any earthly allegiance. Paul is really making a call for intersectionality and solidarity. When we squabble, when we put our own needs above those of others, we break apart into factions as they did in Corinth. When we act against those that are different from us, we do not choose the life that God promises. When we put our own identities above those of others, we opt out of the promised blessings of God. We opt out of life from that creating force that is God's essence. And so when I think of how this applies today, I think of one of the chants that I hear a lot at many of the protests I've been to in the last few months, which is this version of a declaration that my liberation depends on your liberation. This sentiment doesn't take sides. It doesn't claim that one liberation must be obtained first, but instead says that our collective liberation is dependent on the liberation of each. My liberation depends on your liberation. This counters the messages that oppressed people need to wait their turn until their issue comes up. This counters the message that we see a lot in the LGBTQ community that yes, rights for trans people are important, but you have to wait. To choose solidarity is to choose the life promised for us by God. To put God before the way you've gotten to God, I say, is to choose life. The current administration's travel ban, Muslim ban, does not choose life. It doesn't choose life because it cuts off the safer shores of this country from those facing the very real and ever-present dangers in their own. The binary of I belong to Paul and I belong to Apollos can be translated to I belong to the US and I belong to any other country, neglecting to see that borders between countries are something humans have made and are not God ordained. The binary of I follow Jesus or I follow Muhammad neglects to see the long shared history of Christian and Muslim belief. God works in all of us, regardless of our spiritual teacher. Paul doesn't advocate in his letter that they give up who they follow, Paul or Apollos, but instead to see them simply as gardeners in God's garden. And I titled this sermon, God's Promise, because I believe that God's promise to Moses that there is an option of life still stands for us today. I know that I need to be reminded, and maybe you do too, that even now we can choose life. The Israelites were offered this choice on a precipice, at a juncture in their history between known and unknown, as they were about to enter a new land without their beloved, charismatic leader, which reminds me of the hashtag Thanks Obama, the beloved, charismatic leader. This option to choose life still exists for us today. God's promise that we will be happy and be plentiful still stands. And to choose life right now is a radical act. It shouldn't be a surprise that the new administration has decided to put a full court press on those whose identity is, or those who stand in solidarity with, immigrants, Muslims, immigrants who are Muslim, LGBTQ and especially trans people, protesters, public school students, water protectors, Latinx people, and anyone who's a mishmash of those in between. That poem that keeps coming back, when they came for the communists, I said nothing, for I was not a communist. That poem happens in stages, where they come for one group, and then they come for the next, and then they come for the next. But I feel like right now it's happening all at once. It can feel out of hand, hard to comprehend, hard to prioritize, hard to hold each other through. And it feels that way because it is. We're trying to multitask our resistance. And yet, I feel this multitasking all goes back to the same thing. On February 7th, a police officer in Baltimore killed a young black man. an 18-year-old named Curtis Deal. An article in the Baltimore City paper writes that since the election, it seems the focus has shifted from police killings of African Americans to whatever violation of norms or ethics the administration commits on a given day. But the death of Deal shows how they are all a piece, part of the same mentality. This mentality is of those who follow false gods, as the Deuteronomist writes. False gods of white supremacy, of misogyny, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia. And the murders of individual black people by the state, or the wholesale closed-door policy against refugees, are in violation of Moses' urging that we choose life. Moses poses the option from God. We can choose curses, death, to go astray, or we can cling to God, choose life, choose blessings, choose to love God. All oppression is bound up in one. They are all heads on the same hydra of the choice of death. It can be hard to choose life when surrounded by death. It can be hard to choose life when the system tells us, now, isn't death just easier? There's an idea of this in psychology in which people naturally mirror the affect or the feeling of those they are talking to. If you think about, like, if you've gone to a corner store or something and the cashier is really nice and pleasant, it sort of lifts you up. Whereas if you go somewhere and there's someone who's just in one heck of a mood, so negative, so downcast, it's hard to maintain your own positivity in those spaces. That sort of shows you the power of this mirroring. And choosing life at this moment is to go against our basic instinct to mirror. When we're surrounded by messages of despair and negativity, if we're told the story that what's happening in the world is beyond our control, it can be hard to not mirror it, to instead pick up the phone, call in an elected official, join a protest, visit a friend in need, or even to have the faith that we will somehow get through this. Choosing life wouldn't have been an easier choice in the desert outside Canaan. Choosing solidarity wasn't a simpler task in the factious cosmopolitan Corinth. Our spiritual ancestors urged us then as they do now, promising life and solidarity and the blessings that come with it. They speak to us now, continuing to ask the centuries-old question, will you choose the life that God is offering you? Amen.